Uh, so today, what we are going to be focusing on is just some general things that you need to be taking into consideration. We have an image of just a typical old-fashioned garden that has some grass, some turf, and grass and turf is going to have its own problems. We're going to have some trees that will have its own problems. We're going to have some shrubs and other plants that will have its own problems. So probably something typical of what you may encounter problems or you may start looking for problems. What is very important is that when you're going to be started to see or look for problems, there's not just the plant that you need to look at. It's going to be the overall environment, keeping in mind that when a plant is very happy, when a plant is healthy, it's not going to suffer from the damage or a little bit of damage from insects or other things. It's when you have some other factor, some stress factor that is going to lower the immune system of the plant. Now you bring the insects who add more stress to the plant, and now you have other environmental factors like heat. That is going to be now a triple ingredient to the formula, and now you're going to have the plant that is going to be suffering. And so before you start blaming everything on insects, before you start blaming anything on diseases, you need to start looking at what is wrong with the plant. Or is the plant in the right location? Or can I do something to help the plant out rather than try to kill every single insect that lands on the plant? So 90% of the problems that you're going to encounter with plants in the landscape have nothing to do with insects, have nothing to do with diseases. It's all going to be cultural. Either too much water, too little water, too much light, not enough light, or something else is going to be the biggest problem that you need to correct. Otherwise, you're going to be spraying that plant over and over and over, killing the insects that are on top of it. But if you don't alleviate the stress, then the insects are going to keep coming back because that is a perfect host for that plant, for the insects to feed on. So keep that in mind. So some of the things that I mentioned, a position of the plant. We have north, south, east, and west. We have different exposures of the sun, keeping in mind that the sun sets, sunrise is on the east side. So when the sun comes up, you're going to have some light. And as it sets on the west, you're going to have the plants on the west that are going to be exposed to a lot more heat. And so if you put a sensitive plant on the west side that is not used to having full sun, you're going to have problems. The location or where the plant or the proximity of the plant to the houses cast shadow. Buildings, neighbors, those buildings are going to cast a shadow. They're going to be problematic. So now start seeing what is the orientation or the exposure to the sunlight that this plant is facing or dealing with. And is that or could that be a problem? And yes, it could definitely be a problem. So what are some of the things that you should be looking at? So the soil condition, I know we talked about soils in a few other classes, but the soils could have a influence as to whether or not you need to water a little or a lot. So the water management is going to have to be related to the soils. The exposure, sun-loving plants go in the sun, shade-loving plants go in the shade. And we don't really think about winds here in Southern California until we get the Santa Anas that not too long ago, there were hundreds of trees that got knocked down. But the wind burn, the wind drying out plants severely if they are in containers. The wind that is going to dry out the margins of the leaves, that is going to cause margin of burn. That is a problem. So we normally wait for those things to happen because they're not as common here. But sometimes when I get a phone call saying, oh, something is wrong with my plant, can you send me a picture? And then I ask, did you get a windstorm? It's like, usually, yeah, a couple of days we had one. Like, okay, We had a windstorm a couple of days later. Now my plants are showing the damage. So the damage might not be immediate, but keep in mind some of those events, heat. If we have a heat spell, you're gonna get sunburn on some of the plants. Uh, Human activity, damaging, stepping on plants. Also, we mentioned before last time about uh, chemical drift, herbicide drift that can cause some of the problem. And human activity, what is the use of the area? Is it a passive area? Is it an active area? Are the plants going to be trampled? Is it a dog walking area? So knowing what is the activity of the humans around the area can help you to determine some of the mechanical damage that has occurred or given to the plant. The drainage, the water, how quickly it drains. Stagnant water is not good for plant. It takes away the oxygen and then it causes rot. So having good drainage in a combination of good soils, it's going to be the ideal. We're not going to, some people may not have the luxury of those two, but having drain or having the water drain away from the property so that it's not in, plants are not swimming, and or worse, making sure that the water doesn't run towards the house because now you have a much bigger problem. Space, plants should have enough room to grow. So making sure that you put them, if a plant grows 8 feet wide, don't put it in a 3 feet planter bed because that's going to be a problem. And the hardiness zone, knowing your plants, making sure that they are going to be suitable and suited for this environment. People try to keep growing cherries around here. It's not cold enough. People try to grow other plants, and all of those plants that are not really suitable for some of these areas, stress. The stress factor is going to set in, and then you have the problem with insects or other stuff. And so just here's the drawing. So as you are looking for these problems and you visit the site, just keep in mind some of these things that you should keep an eye for. It might be wise and good if you can find the history of the area, such as we know that Signal Hill in the 70s, it was an oil field. Everything was covered with tar. We know some of those areas are contaminated. We know that it's going to be difficult for some of the plants to grow because the soils are toxic. And so having some of the history as to what has happened or what has been buried in some of those in the property is going to be good for you to know. And so the other thing that is going to be important, so you go to the site and you say, okay, what is my lighting? The light is going to be very important. The light is going to be the most important thing for the plants to grow. If nothing else, light. Okay. And it just goes back to sun-loving plants go in the sun. Shade-loving plants go in the shade. Some plants that can tolerate either or, you can put them in either or. Just keep an eye out for them to make sure that you don't put them in what is known as deep shade, or that you don't put them into a lot of light. They'll be able to tolerate it. And so the plants need the light. The light is going to be the most important because this is how the plant make their food. And if you put a sun-loving plant in the shade, it's not getting enough sunlight to manufacture enough food. And so the plant is going to decline. Why? Because it's still living, it's still using resources, it's still feeding, but it's not making enough food to compensate for what is being used. And so over time, the plant will decline. Over time, less leaves will appear. And over time, if that is not remediated, if the light is not increased, the plant will starve and it will die. So some of the answers to, oh, I brought a beautiful plants from Home Depot or from the nursery and it was beautiful, but now it looks really scraggly, it looks really ugly. And what happened to it? Well, many things could happen, including you probably did not put it in the right light. And this is the same thing with the house plants or interior plants. But in the landscape, since we're concentrating more on the outside, we're going to be doing talking about the landscape, but it goes for the same for the interiors as well. So the proper light has to be given to the plant. And the light goes also with the season. So if you get a phone call right now, you're gonna go there and see how well or how the plant may be in the shade right now because the sun, the position of the sun is a little bit lower. And so right now in the winter, the plant may be in the shade. But later on this summer, when the sun is a little bit higher on the horizon, now the plant is gonna be in full sun. And so making sure that you are compensating for the season or the month of the year, spring, autumn, fall, and winter, and where the sun is going to be is also important because I've seen many landscapes that are set and planted in the winter and they have a nice shade garden right here. And then the summer comes and that sun garden, that shade garden is now sun loving and the plants will die or they're not going to be very happy. So don't just look at the image that you're seeing right now. Also forecast what's going to happen several months when the season changes, several months when the sun position changes, and some plants may get more or less depending on where they planted. Go ahead. Fortunately, you can find all that information right. A lot of that information is now available like through Google Maps since they've been photographing. But you can ask them. First of all, you can ask them, so how many hours or how many hours do you estimate have you seen the sun in the summer versus the winter? And or often what is recommended is that before you even engage in planting, that you visit the site in the different seasons. As you're planning, you visit the site and then you determine for yourself what is going to be the number of hours that they're going to get. The most important thing, if they want a shade loving garden, but if you're not going to have sun, you're going to fail. Then you might get something that might be in between, something that can tolerate some sunlight in the summer when it's a lot, sun is higher, and more shade in the winter when the sun is lower. And so what we have here is just a simple diagram of the photosynthesis process. So this is explains why the light is so important. And so just to review, the plants are going to require water that needs to be available in the roots or in the soil. The water needs to be plentiful. The water is going to be absorbed through the roots, and it's going to go through the green pigment or to the green area, which is normally going to be the leaves, where the water is going to be mixed through with carbon dioxide, that then through a chemical change using the sunlight, and this is the light that initiates everything. That's when the plant is going to use convert water and carbon dioxide to glucose or sugar. And the glucose and the sugar is going to be the foundation block for the entire body of the plant, because then glucose can be made a little more complex and then it can be made into starch. And the starch is what's going to be stored for the plant to use later on. And the starch or the glucose can be made into more complex molecule, and then it can be made into cellulose, which is what the body of the plant is made of. So that the leaves, everything it has cellulose, and they can even made even more stronger and can be made into lignin, and that will be some of the fibers and some of the wood that you will find on plants. So all of that comes from the glucose or the product of photosynthesis. And as a byproduct, the plant is going to have oxygen. So this is what we refer to as the building block. Plants are going to, as long as there's sunlight and there's water, the plants are going to be carrying out photosynthesis. And so if there's enough water, there's enough light, the plant can be building storage of glucose throughout the entire day. As it's working, and since it's alive, it's also going to be burning some of that energy. So that is going to be known as respiration. So photosynthesis builds, respiration breaks down. And so through respiration, the plant is going to take the glucose, and then it's going to use the enzymes, and the result is going to be energy for the plant to grow, energy for the plant to flower, energy for the plant to carry its biological function. And a byproduct is going to be heat. Yes, plants are nice and warm, at least warmer than the environment, and carbon dioxide. But when we look at the image on the right side, even though the plant might be in full sun, the plants are still not able to use every single wavelength of light. So they're only taking a small amount. So even in full sun, I wish they would take it all and be able to use it, but there's only certain wavelengths that the plant can use. Many of the light is just going to go through the leaves, and so that's all going to be lost. Some of the light may be reflected, so that's all going to be lost. So then we just have a nice breakdown of some of the actual amount of light, just general amount of light that is lost or not really being used by the plant. And so when you look at this diagram, again, some of them is going to be reflected, some of them is going to be dissipated, some of them is going to be used for the metabolic process of the plant, and only about 5% of that light that hits the leaves or that is able to be used by the plant in the photosynthesis is going to be used for creating the glucose or the carbohydrates, the food, the storage for the plant. So that's why when you put a plant, a sun-loving plant in the shade, there's even less light that is hitting the leaves. And if it's already losing some of it through the natural environment or natural process, then it could be even 1% of that light that is made into food or sugar or carbohydrates. And that's why over time, when the plant is in the wrong area or in a sun-loving plant is in the shade, it's going to eventually starve to death. A shade-loving plant, if it's put in the sun, is going to have a damage. So the chlorophyll is sensitive. The shade-loving plant evolved to have more chlorophyll because they have to take advantage of the little or lesser light that hits their leaves. And so when you put them in the sunlight, they're going to turn yellowish. And that is just damage from this intense sunlight that they're not used to. And they're going to turn yellow, and that's going to damage the chlorophyll, and the leaves are going to burn, and the yellowish chlorophyll is going to be less likely to make even to photosynthesize, and less energy that is going to be made by the plant. So that's why the light, the proper light for the plant is very important to maximize the amount of energy, sugar that they build, and to prevent the damage to the photosynthesis if you put them in the wrong place. And so shade-loving plants, here's just an example of some very happy plants in the shade between two buildings. We have your typical impatiens, we have your ferns, we have your cast iron, we have your palms. So there are many plants that can tolerate this environment in between two buildings, and or sun-loving plants. And also be aware of the surroundings, because unfortunately for us in the city, we like to put cement all over the ground. And so not only is this plant in full sun receiving a lot of heat, but you also have reflected heat from the cement. If you ever walk on a parking lot in the summer, it's very hot. So the sunlight is being reflected. Now there's extra heat that the plant is being subjected to. And if it's a heat spell, then the heat or the intensity of the heat could be so high that the plant may suffer some damage. So as you are looking, trying to figure out what is wrong with my plant, what is happening with my plant, uh, don't forget the surrounding environment. Don't forget that sometimes you may have somebody park by this palm, and their car, their exhaust from their car is just hitting the palm and damaging some of the plants. That could also happen. Obviously, those are going to be pollution problems. But reflected heat, not only from cement, reflected heat from windows, reflected heat from swimming pools or other water features. Some of those things you need to take into consideration. The water. Here's the campus several years ago when every winter it was a flood. So we have some nice water basin next to us. And in 1994, this is not 1994, but in 1994, the pumps failed. And apparently the water in the garden was about 5 or 6 feet high. That was way before, actually, a couple of years before I came here. But this is very common. In some cases, you don't have control. This has to do with some of the drainage. Obviously, we put cement so the water does not have the ability to percolate or go into the soil. And if the gutters are not maintained, then the water is not going to flow. So hopefully you don't have to deal with this. But the water, plenty of water is needed by the plant. And that has to do with the photosynthesis because it needs to make its own food. So having humidity, having moisture in the soil, and having soil that is going to hold water is going to be very, very important. So if nothing else, if you are dealing with an outdoor landscape, again, question that I always get asked, I want to put a landscape, I want to install a garden. The first thing that I'm going to recommend is you need to install an irrigation system, or do you have a working irrigation system? And I'm saying working because sometimes they don't really tend to it, and they just they have it, but they never turn it on. They have no idea in what condition it is. And then they're going to say, well, I want to water by hand. Like, okay. Well, I highly recommend for you to get an irrigation system because it is precise. When you're going to be watering by hand, I don't doubt that you will, but sometimes you're going to get busy and you're going to run away before you have the chance to water your plants, and now your plants are going to suffer. Or sometimes you're going to come home, you're going to be very tired, you're not going to go and water those plants. And or sometimes it's just going to hit or miss the plants, watering the plants, and before they get too hot, and then your plants are going to suffer and you're going to have irreversible damage. So whenever possible, recommend for an irrigation system. It's a little bit more precise. You have an automatic clock that you can set it, time it. And now if you use some of those smart clocks that measure the amount of water that is lost from the soil, then it just turns on for whatever minutes it takes to return that water to the soil that was lost. So that's going to be highly recommended. Otherwise, it's not going to be as precise, and people are not as precise as plants. Unless you retire and you have nothing else and you spend every day of the garden of your life in your garden, then that's fine. But most of individuals will not. So irrigation system is going to save a lot of headaches. Or you need to check, make sure that things are working properly. You need to check to make sure that there is even coverage between the sprinkler, what is known as the sprinkler heads, and that every single area of the garden is being watered. When dealing with the irrigation system, you can also ensure that, or you have stations, so that one station waters some of the plants that may require more water, like the turf, and some other stations can water some of the larger shrubs that may require less water, less time, and all of that. So that's why it's good to have several stations, a nice irrigation system with several stations, so that you can create zones within the garden of the plants that have similar water requirements. So regardless of how the water gets added to the landscape, it could be rain, could be the irrigation system. Water is going to go, or going to hit the ground, as we're going to say. Keep in mind that the water is going to be transpire, or there's going to be some transpiration. The water is not going to stay in the ground forever. A vast majority of the water is going to be lost to the environment through the trees, transpiration. So the water that is absorbed by the trees will eventually get to the leaves and be lost as water vapor in the process of photosynthesis. So that's going to begin the process of drying out the soils. Some of the water is going to evaporate. So if it's really hot, if it's really windy, this is going to be a lot quicker. And so a couple of inches on the surface will become very dry because the sun is going to evaporate the water and the wind is going to evaporate the water, and or anything that is on top is going to eventually get evaporated. So you will lose the water through evaporation, and some of them is going to dry out. If you put a lot of water at one time, the soil is not able to uptake it or drink it quick enough, and you're going to start losing it into the gutters, and now that water is not going to be available for the plants, and you have now wasted a bunch of water. So because of evaporation, transpiration, and possibly the draining of the water, that's what's going to cause the soils to dry out, and that's when you're going to have to keep watering or irrigating your plants to return the valuable humidity that is needed for the plant to make their own food. So the new clocks that I mentioned, they measure the evaporation and the transpiration of the soil, and they use the satellites. And so that's how they determine that in this area, I lost an inch of water through evaporation and transpiration. I'm now going to turn on the irrigation system for 5 minutes just to return that inch of water, and then they shut off. And they also don't turn on if there's going to be rain in the forecast, or if it's raining. That's another problem that you see. So here is some of the things that you can highly recommend. If the area or the garden has just bare soil, bare dirt, that's a problem, because it's not a problem. That could be problematic for some plants, because that's going to be often it's going to be too hot. So what is often recommended is that you add a layer of mulch, that organic matter that is going to serve as a blanket to reduce the weeds. So because some of the weeds may require sunlight, or if they get smothered by the mulch, then the weeds are not going to have a chance to grow. And so reducing the amount of weeds is going to be a nice benefit from adding mulch. Conserving moisture, because underneath the mulch, the water is going to be protected, so that is going to prevent some evaporation. If there's a strong wind, the mulch may dry out, but the water below it is going to remain or going to be prevented from drying out or escaping. So it helps to conserve water or keep water in the soil a little bit longer, so thus reducing the amount of irrigation that you may need. And then increase our soil organic matter. So over time, if you use natural or plant-based mulches, then they'll rot, they'll decompose, they'll add organic matter to the soil, thus decreasing the amount of fertilizers that you may have need. And then weeds, reducing weeds, just preventing some of the seeds from growing. So it's highly recommended. Having just plain dirt, plain soil exposed to the environment is going to be somewhat problematic. And it adds a nice layer, nice color, and some of them can be quite aesthetic. So here's just some suggestions. So you go there and there's no mulch, then you can recommend that about 3 to 4 inches of of mulch be used. And what's also important is that those have to be renewed after several months. So I'm going to say if you mulch at least twice a year, so every 6 months, just to compensate for what is being lost. then that would be highly recommended. You don't want to pile it where you're going to have 2-3 feet. Obviously, that's not going to be good either. But just 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Let it rot a little, and then you add some more. And over time, that also provides a good area for insects to feed on. And plants are gonna be even happier because now they're gonna be getting more fertilizer uh, from the insects and the other animals. So the caution here with the grass clippings tends to compress and they get really wet and they get really slimy and they get really stinky. So just taking the grass clippings and just piling them is not good. So if you're going to use the grass clippings, just mix them with some leaves so that they don't just compress and pile and smell and stink. So that's the important thing. The nutrients are also going to be important, much more important with the container plants because those are going to be relying on just whatever soil they have in the pot. And every single time that you water plants, every single time that we have rain, there is going to be some leaching of the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that are going to be found in the soil. Some of them less than others, but there's going to be some leaching. And so here's just a symptom of some of those deficiencies. Intervenal chlorosis, that is the name, the symptom, which means yellowing in between the veins. And this is a symptom of nitrogen, where the plant just has the nitrogen in the more important areas like the veins or the tips. But when you have something this color, this yellowing, there's something wrong there. And it could be that there's nothing being added, either fertilizer or no organic matter that's going to return the soil. The plant keeps growing, and over time it's just going to suffer. And if this is not remediated, then the plant may eventually die. So minerals that are found, again, there's 16. Fertilizers are important. Also fertilize about twice a year is going to be highly recommended. Or if you keep a nice layer of mulch that will keep breaking down, returning some valuable vitamins and minerals to the soil, then you can fertilize even less. But a way for the plant to continuously get nutrients, or for a way for the soils to regain some of the nutrients that are being lost either to the environment or being lost because the plants are using them. And all the other animals will use them as well. So this is just the general elements that you may have to deal with, mainly the ones on the left, the macronutrients, the one that the plants use the most. And from that is going to be the nitrogen is going to be probably the more important one. So if your plants are yellowing with the veins being green, then you know that's probably a nitrogen and you can remediate it. Or sometimes you might have some iron deficiency that might be, it's also yellowing, but it's not the intervenal. So go ahead. Yes. So yes, and yes. So as we are now looking and analyzing plants even more, when a leaf is going to die, so it has lived its cycle, and now the chlorophyll dies because it's no use to the plant anymore, you're also going to get the yellowing. So yellowing of the leaf is for a lot of things, not just the nutrient deficiency. It's also for those plants that are in the shade loving and put in the sun, is going to also yellow. But when you're going to, what you describe, when the leaf is dying, you're not going to have the green veins. The veins are also going to be yellowing. So now what becomes important is the pattern of the yellowing, or different patterns that you can see that is going to help you to determine if it's a natural thing, the leaf dying, or if it's an unnatural thing, a lack of vitamins and mineral, or if it's a damage caused by the sun. Exactly. So what is gonna normally what's gonna happen? So that's just the leaf, but in there's other symptoms that the plant is gonna exhibit. So in addition to the yellowing leaves with the green veins, the tips of the leaves are gonna be green because the plant is gonna be focusing whatever little energy, nitrogen it has to the most important area, and that is the growing tips. So green tips, yellow leaves, green veins, that is several symptoms of nitrogen. So yes, you're gonna have to look at the entire picture. And yes, people send me just photographs of a leaf, like what's wrong with my plant? Like, well, that could be 100 things. I need to see the entire plant, and I need to see some of the environment, because that's gonna help me to better diagnose the problem than to just, here's a leaf, what is wrong with my plant? Like, oh. So yes, the entire plant has to be evaluated for other symptoms that can help you to discard some of the other things that are probably not the causing problem. Yes, so the leaf that you sent me, so you asked me, you can share the leaf, the photograph with the class later on. So what told me that it was not a bacteria? It started from the tips and it went back. Bacteria do not do that. Bacteria is a spot. And bacteria spots, because bacteria do not have strong digestive enzymes, they cannot break the big veins of the leaves. So when they hit a vein, then they kind of follow the margin of the vein, but they do not go through the big veins. Whereas fungi who have better digestive enzymes will. So that's how you can separate whether a spot on a leaf is caused by a bacteria or a fungi. If they cross the vein, the main veins or some of the larger veins, it's a fungi. If they don't cross the veins, it's a bacteria. If it begins from the tip or the margin, we have 101 things that could cause that. I think if you, it was like within 2 days, it wasn't like, but that was at the bottom, right? No. The where was the leaf? On the top. But it's still it started from the tip. So I'm gonna say it probably the heat spell, because that's a cool loving plant. There was a heat spell that we had when temperature was 80 degrees around here, and there was some stress already. Maybe it wasn't water enough, where now the heat maybe wilted a little, and the damage began to show a couple of days later as a tip burn, followed by a marginal, followed by half of the leaf, and that's what you got. So I can probably associate it with the heat spell that we had, and probably some kind of not enough water, because it was just, you were too busy. Any other questions? See, that's the difference between me just talking to a computer and actually talking to the class. I actually get questions. And so here's just another very important thing. So the plants are normally going to be actively growing when the temperature is higher, and that also goes for the organisms. So when the temperature is nice and warm and it's summer, things are more active, so more nutrient is going to be used by the plant. And so this is where you should not be fertilizing plants in the winter, because you're going to lose the fertilizer, or the other organisms are going to use them. So what you want to make sure is to time your fertilization to when the plant is actively growing. And I'm saying actively growing because obviously we're in Southern California, and we have cool season plants and we have warm season plants, so we can grow both of them. So just make sure that whenever that specific plant is actively growing, that's when you should use the fertilizer, and be aware that as temperatures get hotter, now the other organisms are going to start to become more active, and the other organisms are also going to be requiring say almost the same vitamins and minerals as the plant. So the plants are always going to be competing. The roots will be competing with soil organisms for the vitamins and minerals. So not every single ounce of fertilizer that you put on the soil is going to be used by the plant. Most of it will also get lost. So here's plants that grow well in the right conditions. So right temperature, happy plants, good soil, happy plants, right environment, right water. And that's a fantasy, but we'll try. We'll keep trying. And then the temperature too cold or too hot may affect the plant growth. Yes. Tropical plants like me right now are suffering. We're not growing. We like that nice warm temperature. So heat-loving plants are suffering. Cold-loving plants are very happy. And later on, during that heat spell, plants, the sunflowers that Gloria planted were very happy, and everything else was suffering in the back, the carrots and everything else. So be aware of the temperature that will affect the fertilizer and the plant growth. So this is also very important when you are going to be installing a new landscape. It is highly recommended, and this is going to go against what many you might read in Granny's blogging, but it's not recommended to amend the backfill. So what happens is that plants are already growing in a container, and when you amend the soil around them, or when you put a lot of organic matter, you're just creating a bigger pot or a bigger container. The hole is just going to be covered with a very nice, loose, well-drained soil, and the plants love that. But what we want is when you are going to be planting a perennial, and this is very important, a perennial. This is not a vegetable garden. This is a perennial. The plants that are going to be there for many, many years, that you force the plants to grow out into the native soil. By forcing them out, they're going to be better able to survive. They're going to require less water over time, and they're going to be a lot stronger. So what you want to do is when you're going to be digging the hole for putting a plant in the ground, that you use that same dirt, soil to backfill the hole. Because this is your house now. This is this horrible soil that you're going to be growing in. Get used to it. So that's very important. That's for trees. That's for any of those perennial plants. Or if you're going to feel sorry for them, you can just amend it once, but that's about it. You amend the top or the surface, but the fill, whatever you're going to backfill the hole with, make sure that you don't mix it. Make sure that you don't blend in any amendment, because that is not going to be good. Then you have to water it thoroughly. You got to make sure that when the plant goes in the ground, the very first watering is the most important watering of its life, because it's going to bring the soil particles in close proximity to the roots. If there's holes, if there's pockets of air, that is going to dry out the roots, and the plant is not going to be happy. So you need to saturate that plant. So saturate it, make good contact with the soil and the roots, and your plant is going to be set to go. Oftentimes, you might have to create a berm so that it's going to hold the water. Especially in the beginning, you create the berm right around what's the root ball, because you have to water directly into the root ball for the first couple of months until the roots become established or they're able to grow into the native soil. Then you can gradually widen that berm, and over time, then you can remove it, because by that time, the roots are going to be growing in the soil. Now you can water the soil naturally and not directly into the root ball. So I know that when you go into some of these landscapes, there's hardly anybody who makes berms, but then you have a lot of plants that get lost because they're not getting enough water in the initial or after planting. Yeah, hold on. And then the layer of mulch. So the layer of mulch on top, that is going to keep the temperature down and cool, and also prevent some of the water that is valuable right there. Because when you first planted, the roots are going to be in that ball and they're not out into the soil. So you have to give them some time. Yes, Gloria? What is a berm? It's like a little, I'm going to say like a little pool when you put the soil around, make like a circle of soil, a mound of soil around the entire perimeter of the plant, so that the water doesn't just drain out. No, that doesn't work. So when they have the pipe inserted into the ground, no. So this is, you dig the hole, you put your plant you cover it or backfill with the original soil, the native soil that you have there. And then you create that extra spare soil. You create that berm or that little mound around, and then you water it. You let the water drain or sink in, and then you water again, and then you water again. A couple of times. I've said 3 times, be best, but I've been to some tree planting when they just put a bucket of water and then they leave like, ew. Then I have to go and do it like 20 more times. And so just here's just a photograph of the newly installed landscape with mulch, and the mulch has that extra finishing touches that gives it a finished look. So planting don'ts, very important. Do not amend the backfill. So that's not good. So whenever possible, don't amend it. Force the plants to grow in that native soil. Dig the holes that are deeper than the container. And that is because if the holes are very deep, there's going to be some settling and the plant will eventually be deeper or be buried too low. And that is going to be another problem. What's going to happen then when the plant sinks, then the native soil is going to cover the top of the root ball. And 99% of failures on new installation of perennial plants are because of this. Or oftentimes I get a phone call like, I just put a new garden and I have this plant over here on the corner that is just wilting and dying, and I have no idea because irrigation is working well. All the other plants are fine, but this one is dying. Why do you think that's happening? So when you go there and you see it, what is often recommended is that you scrape the top soil and then you water the root ball. And 99% of the time, that plant is going to bounce back. So what happens with the native soil versus the media that the plant is growing in is that the drainage is going to be very poor in the native soil that cover the top. So now when you water the top of the plant or the native soil that kind of went on top because the plant got deeper, the water is not going to percolate into the root ball. It's just going to follow the native soil around. So technically your plant, your root ball is not getting any water, and the water is just going to be going around and around into the native soil, but never into the root ball. So that's why you scrape that native soil, you put water into the root ball, and now your plant is irrigated. You have to do it a few times, or just if it's a new one, just lift it a little so that you're watering the root ball in the beginning so that the plant doesn't go under stress. And it's water stress, wilting, all the same symptoms because that is what's happening. Those too deep in the early planting. And do not fertilize. The plants already have some fertilizers to get established, or you fertilize, you're just going to trigger a bunch of growth and the plant is not established yet. That will come later. But when you first plant a landscape, perennial landscape, do not fertilize because that's going to be a problem. Question. So the mulch is going to be a form of the blanket, but when it rots and breaks down, it will be putting vitamins and minerals in the soil. And as you continue on mulching throughout the year, then there is no need for you to add any additional fertilizers. So yeah, it will eventually become a form of fertilizer or vitamins and minerals for the plants. When you're first planting, so you dig the hole, you plant the, put your plants in the ground, you water them, and then you put a layer of mulch on top. So yes, after you're done planting, that's for you. After you're done planting, then you get, you can put your layer of mulch to give it that final look. Any other questions?
I think I need clarification.
Okay.
So the berm, you said saying don't put dirt on top, but then you're saying also put, or like. I don't
So,
know.
but the berm goes on the outside of the root ball.
Oh, okay.
So it's not just on top. So where you have the root ball, so if it's a 5-gallon, the root ball is going to be something like this. Then when you make the hole should be as wide as the root ball. Then the berm goes around the outside, so that when you water, the water is going to go into the root ball and then through the root ball and then into the soil. But and then you have to make sure that the berm doesn't collapse inside and puts the soil on top of the root ball.
What did you say about fertilizer?
Do not use fertilizers after you plant or after initial planting. Not necessary. The fertilizer should be, a fertilizing regime needs to start when the plants are established or establishing.
So don't tackle it after that.
No, don't add fertilizer after you put your plants in the ground.
All those fertilizers that say like B1 and that say I'm a starter transplant,
That's for tiny little things,
tiny stuff. Okay.
for seedlings, because you're going to be probably disturbing some of the roots, but those are to prevent the shock. With this kind of planting, you're just bringing a container out of the ground, out of the pot, so you're not destroying a lot of the roots.
Okay.
You may be breaking some just to allow them to spread out, but it's not the shock. The shock is not going to be as severe. But a lot of those starter fertilizers, I'll be very careful because those are more like marketing stuff.
They just smell like chicken broth.
Oh, delicious. All right, and so just a couple of things. Pruning is also very important. So when you prune, make sure that you treat a prune or a pruning as a surgery. You need to have really good, sharp tools that are going to be clean and not transmit diseases. You wouldn't want to be operated with a Mankey in a Mankey hospital, do you? Not good. So make sure that your tools are disinfected if the plant is valuable, because that is a way for transmitting diseases. Also, if you were to strip the bark or if the cut is not clean, then that is not going to heal properly. So you got to make sure that at all times you make clean cuts and with clean tools. You always want to cut a branch down to a bud or a node, a lateral bud, because that's going to ensure that that branch is going to keep on growing and it's going to prevent the stubs, which I keep saying in the pruning class. No stubs, no stubs. We don't want to leave any stubs. If there's no buds present in the branch that you see, when you're going to cut it, then remove the entire branch, because that's going to die back and it's not going to be good. And flush cuts, do not make flush cuts over large wounds, especially on trees. And we'll show you that. The next one. So here's where when you're going to be cutting branches, you got to cut as close to the node as possible without going through. So the one on the left is correct. Here's the node, and the one in the middle, it's just cut way too much. So that branch or that little node is not going to have enough footing, or the branch is not going to be strong. And this one was cut way too high. So now you have a stub that will die back. And when it dies back, now it's an entryway for problems, pathogen diseases, and a bunch of other things. So this has a good cut. This one will heal, and then this branch will begin to grow, and eventually it's going to cover it. And when you have a big branch, make sure that you don't cut flush with the stem, because what happens when you cut it flush, you're going to be injuring the stem and not cutting the branch. There's going to be an area, some wrinkles at the base of branches that are going to be known as the branch collar ridge, that you must keep, because that's going to eventually close and seal the wound. So clean cuts, no stubs. All right, so here's just some of a couple of other concepts. For integrated pest management, we're going to be dealing with diseases. We'll talk about those later. And the entire concept of IPM, integrated pest management, started many years ago, and it started with this wonderful insect, cottony cushion scale. Several years ago, this insect was introduced into California, and it was covering every citrus tree in California. And they were spraying for it. They couldn't keep control over them. And that's when they started to bring out the concept of, okay, how do we manage this? If the chemicals are not working, how do we control it? How do we manage it? How do we deal with it? Because it's affecting the industry. Different times, a scientist started looking at what eats this insect. And so they found that a ladybug, a lady beetle, was in the natural area where these insects are native to, was eating them. And so in different times that scientists kind of went over there, brought back some of those ladybugs, and he kind of raised them in a tent. And then magically, he just decided to open the tent and let the ladybugs out. And sure enough, within several months, the ladybugs started spreading, and the population of the cottony cushion scale started to go decline. They are never going to be eradicated, but because they have a natural predator, their numbers are going to be low to the point where they're not going to be a serious problem. And so that is what started all these concepts of integrated pest management, or dealing with the problems. Not so much by trying to nuke them, but figuring out, can we do some kind of mechanical control first? If the mechanical control is not working, can we then rely or bring in some of the natural enemies of this insect if they're available? And if that is not working, can we now begin to use some of the lesser toxic chemicals, or the ones that are going to have more of a broad spectrum? And then if that is not working, now we can rely on some of the harsher chemicals or some of the stronger products that are out there. So that's what started, this insect is what started all this control measures, or at least bringing awareness of these control measures. Now, there's no way for that to happen. Now, if a problem occurs, it is a cycle of about 15 years for the people to find and raise enough of those biological controls, natural enemies, to be able to release them in California, because we don't want the cure to become a problem later on. So it's a bunch of studies and a bunch of testings. But during the different times, he was just able to just do it himself, and voila, it happened. So cottony cushion scale is still out there. It affects several plants. And so for our purpose, we are going to be describing a pest. Okay, so this is integrated pest management. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with pests. And just for our definition, is all biological organisms, whether it be bacteria causing leaf spot on plants, a virus. We have a citrus greening virus right now. Viroids are going to be less common. Phytoplasm, also less common. Fungi, that will be pathogenic to plants. Insects, which some of you have. Mites, nematodes, weeds, parasitic higher plants. Birds, yes, there's companies that deal with pigeons because they poop around areas, and they're a pest, or other birds that are out there, or mammals. We have ground squirrels and gophers that interfere with the plant production or the usage of the area. It is said that the biggest pest in the world is humans, because we have now taken over everything and we're destroying everything. But again, that's a different story. So anything could be a pest. It just depends on what what problem they're causing. So be aware of that. That's for our definition. And so just some of our general pests, although we're concentrating on the landscape, we will take home pests like the roach, and I mentioned head lice and bed bugs. We'll take them as well, or some of the yellow jackets, the wasps that are going to sting people, so they're going to be considered problematic. So we have some of the invertebrates, insects, roaches, ants, vertebrates, gophers, ground squirrels, rats, mice. Don't bring those, please. Weeds, plants in different areas, or plant pathogen, plant diseases. And I'm sure some of you brought some of this already. So it's just some of the examples that we're going to see in class. There are also aquatic insects. It is still kind of nice to be in Southern California, where mosquitoes are kept under control. Now, having said that, we do have the introduction of the Asian tiger mosquito, and they are known as ankle biters because they are going to bite between your ankle and your knee. So if you wear shorts, which I don't, so I don't have a problem with them. This is if you feel like there's some kind of biting, it's probably one of those. That is becoming more of a problem because it's attacking people and feeding on people throughout the day. Normally mosquitoes would come like at dusk and during the night, and then they go to bed during the daytime, so you can be outside in the daytime, no problem. But this mosquito, the tiger mosquito, is active the entire day. And if you wear shorts, you know what I'm talking about. So that is a new one. So let's find it. Let's bring it in. Let's take a photograph. But we do have a good pest control of aquatic insects. So the Department of Agriculture, Weights and Measure, they are monitoring different areas. So they're the ones who, if you have a swimming pool that is not up to par or is not kept, they'll tell you you need to either drain it or deal with it because this is harboring some mosquitoes. And they go around to, this is Lake Machado, which is Harbor Regional on Vermont and PCH, where they constantly spray for mosquitoes to keep them at bay so that we don't have to be like Eastern United States, where if you go out at dusk, you're going to be eaten by mosquitoes and it's not fun. Or in this other case, perhaps a combination of some weed, some water weed, like a rondo that creates pockets of water that is not flowing, that then allows for mosquitoes to breed and harbor them. So they're moving around. They're still doing a good job, but that tiger mosquito, I have no problem. Tossers. Question? No. So aquatic insect, aquatic plants, aquatic insects, bring them in because some of them are going to be good. Some of them are going to be bad. And then biting flies. We don't really have them around here. I've been bitten in some of the mountains, but I've not been bitten by them here. But there are some biting flies. Here's just a few more insects. Some of the ones that are going to be feeding on plants. We have just your typical aphids, mealybug, scale, whitefly, just your typical, and we're going to focus and deal with some of this plant feeding insects because obviously we like the landscape. And so when we're looking at insects, that is a group of animals. But insects are going to fall into the category of what is known as an arthropod. An arthropod can be translated as jointed legs. So if you see the insect, their legs kind of have a joints. And so within the arthropods, we have the shrimps and the crustaceans. So yes, crabs are nothing more than water insects, and shrimp tastes exactly like a grasshopper. Trust me, I've had both. And so if they have jointed legs, then they fall into the arthropods. We also have millipedes and centipedes that will fall into this category. And even spiders, which we know they're arachnids, will fall into the category of arthropods. And so also the true insects. So within the arthropods, we have some land crustaceans. So the roly-poly. That is not an insect. It's just a water or it's an ancestor was in the water, and this one happens to find a niche in the soil, feeding on organic matter and decomposing material, and is now completely 100% a land crustacean. If you go by some of the tidal pools, you may see some of the water crustacean like on the rocks and running around and running from you. But the roly-poly, which is different than the pillbug, so make sure that you tell me the right name. It's going to be a land crustacean, land shrimp, and it tastes like shrimp. So land crustacean, land shrimp. So when we're going to be looking at the true insects, so any of those, actually, we're not taking shrimps, we're not taking crabs, we're not taking lobsters unless it's already seasoned to perfection. Then we'll take it, but not if it's alive. So when we're talking about the insects, this is just a general drawing of the insect. So the first thing that you need to be looking at is whether or not the sample that you have has 3 body parts. So body part number 1 is going to be the head that is going to have antennae. So true insects have antennae. If it doesn't have an antenna, then it's not a true insect. Spiders do not have antennae. The head is also going to have the jaws or the mandible, the feeding apparatus, which is going to be important. Behind the head is going to be the thorax. The thorax is going to house 6 legs, 3 in each side. Millipedes have more than 6, so they're not true insects. And depending on the insect, it can have wings or lost them. So be aware of that. Or wings can be modified, but insects will normally have 4 wings if they have them. Or modification, or no wings at all. So be aware of that. And then there's going to be the abdomen, which is going to have a digestive system, reproductive system, and a bunch of other things. What I also want to point out from this drawing is this word here called spherical. Okay, the word spherical is going to be tiny openings or holes on the side of the body. So the sphericals are going to be the site where the insects are going to carry gas exchange. This is where they're going to breathe through. And this is important because if you are going to use any kind of oils, any kind of soaps, any of those lesser organic chemical products to treat an insect, that means that you're going to saturate that insect with the oil that will clog the sphericals that will cause the insect to suffocate and die. So that's how you're going to be killing the insects if you are going to be using oils or horticulture soaps or any of those products. So you got to make sure that you saturate the insect where the sphericals are going to be blocked or covered with the oil. If you don't get complete coverage and the insect is still able to breathe, you're not going to kill it. So that's important. So be aware of that. And so if we look at the mouth or the head of the insects, here's some of my photographs. So there's the antennae, normally 2 of them. They're going to be very important for detecting chemical signals in communication, or also to feel around, feel their surroundings. So they can, if the insect can see through their antennas, or they can see the environment, not see through it. And the mouth can be changed depending on the diet of the insect. This one has jaws. Grasshoppers chew leaves. So you can see what is referred to as scleratinized, which means they're hardened or rigid because they have to chew a lot, sometimes maybe some twigs. So usually the jaws are going to be hard to be able to break down or chew their food. Or if the insect has a liquid diet, such as a butterfly, then the mouth part is going to be modified into a proboscis. So now it's a very long straw that the butterfly is going to be able to insert it into the flower and drink the nectar from flowers. So now this is a modification for a liquid diet. If it's a fly, then it's going to have a sponge because some flies, although some flies have the jaws that will bite, so those are biting flies. Others are just going to have a sponge that they're going to just lap whatever food, water, sweat is you get, or it happens to be eating. This is the photograph from the microscope. And if you've never seen the mouth of a fly, that's how it looks. So it's nothing more than a kind of like a sponge. So it's just going to walk around, sponge the food. And this is an even close up of the mouth of the fly right there. So it doesn't bite. It just kind of sponges things around. And what also happens with flies, you may have seen it. If you're over 20, you remember the movie Fly. So sometimes flies will regurgitate digestive enzymes that will break down some of the organic matter, and then they'll slap it, sponge it, and eat it. So yeah, when they did that to the hen, it's actually kind of accurate. Or the mouth part can be modified into a stylet, or what we like to know refer to as a syringe. Is hollow. Stylets are also going to be modified for a liquid diet. In this case, it's a plant bug that is going to feed on the sap of the plant. And so that's going to be its diet. It's going to stab the stem of the plant, go into the vascular system, drink the sap, and that's how the plant's going to feed itself. So the insects that you have today, make sure that we start looking and seeing what kind of mouth part are we looking at.
What's the difference between that and
the proboscis?
the butterfly?
The proboscis is not going to stab. So it doesn't have a very sharp point. It's just a very long straw just for drinking. This is a stabbing mechanism. So the plant, the bug is going to stab the plant. The bed bugs are going to stab you. And then when they have their stylet in you, in your veins, then they're going to drink the blood, or the blood is just going to flow freely to their mouth. So it has a very sharp tip. And when not in use, the mouth part is folded onto its body. So there's the tip of the stylet is right here, and then that's the very tiny head. So that's where it keeps it as it moves around and walks and flies. I mentioned the antennae could be several segments, and you don't need to know all the segments. You don't need to know all the different parts unless you want to, but know that the antennae are also going to be very important for many insects or for IDing them. So such as the case when we have a moth. So here's a moth, and if you notice, their antennae are going to be almost feathery because they're nocturnal. So they rely on the hormones, sorry, not the pheromones, the chemical signals from other moths to find a partner and find a mate. And so they have to be able to sense or grasp faint smells of pheromone and find their potential mate. So there's some beautiful feather-like antennae from a moth, and we'll show you more later on. So the thorax, here's the thorax. We have the wings. So there's a beautiful grasshopper that we caught, and then we just opened the wings. So wing number 1 is going to be a little bit rigid. That's going to be the top portion. Wing number 2 is going to be the reddish or the colorful portion. Sometimes, we'll show the modification later. The legs can also be modified. The legs are going to have a nice claw. So if you ever get an insect that lands on you, it's probably going to, feel it. Or if you wonder why is it that insects can climb the walls, is because they have a claw, and it's small enough that they can just fit in the grooves and crevices of the wall and be able to climb. Or depending on the insect, so this is a cricket, which is going to jump. You see a very muscular big leg because they need it to be able to jump high. And or later on when we see praying mantis, their front legs are going to be modified into the raptorial arms, and that's just for grabbing and keeping and eating as they hold their prey. And here's just the abdomen with the digestive enzyme and the rest. But also now be aware of the ovipositor, which is nothing more than translates to egg laying apparatus. So this is what the insect is going to use to insert into the soil and lay the eggs. Or if you ever wonder, why is it that only the female bees sting, is because the stinger on a bee is a modified egg laying apparatus. Since the females don't really lay eggs, that's only the queen, it is now plays a role in defending. And because male bees do not lay eggs, not that we know of, then it's only the females who will sting, because it's an egg laying apparatus modified into a stinger for defense. And the sphericals right here, and just a bunch of other, the other system, but we're not going to start in there. And of course, the rear end, because sometimes when you're going to have an insect problem, especially with some of the bark beetles, we're going to use the word frass, F-R-A-S, and that is going to mean insect poop. So sometimes with beetles, the bark beetles, if they kick their frass, that is going to be one type of beetle or several types of beetles. So the kickers are going to be that you can use that. Or if they pack it, they kind of keep it inside their tunnels. That's another different types of beetle. So start looking at the frass, and you obviously know that when you have a home and you start seeing frass coming from the side of the logs or the wood, then you know you have termites, because the poop frass from termite is first indicator that you have a problem with termite. So the insect poop is also going to be important for you to start not looking at, but just be aware of it. So here's just the cricket, another cricket. Here's show you a very thick leg, muscles, and then there's the egg laying apparatus right there. So that's, they're going to lay their eggs in the ground. And this is a mole cricket. And this one is going to have claws in the front because they go underground and they bury, they make tunnels. So they're going to have very strong forehands so that they can dig around. We also mentioned last time about the life cycle, complete or incomplete. So these are just the incomplete, where all insects will be born from an egg. And when they first hatch, they're going to go into what is known as a nymphal stage or an instar. That's sometimes used as well. And so when you have an incomplete life cycle, the baby plant insect is going to look like a small version of the adult. The other important thing that you need to know is that insects have their skin on the outside. They have an exoskeleton that is going to be rigid. And that's what's going to allow it to be able to walk upright or be able to stand and move around. So as the insects grow, they're going to have to get a new exoskeleton, because if the old one is too small, the insect can be crushed in it. And so insects are going to go through a molting cycle. So every couple of months, every couple of weeks, however, depending on temperature, they're going to change their exoskeleton and grow into it. And then when they grow into it, then they're going to get a bigger one until they become an adult. Once they become an adult, they're no longer going to grow. And this is important because some of the more specific chemicals are going to target this, where they're going to prevent the insect from changing or molting, whereas the insect is really going to be crushed. As it's trying to molt, it's not going to be able to break it, and it keeps growing inside their exoskeleton, and it's just going to get crushed inside. So that's how some of the more specific treatments are going to be affecting or killing the insects when you use the chemical control. So different stages. What determines the rate of growth of insects? Temperature. If it's hot, they grow very quickly. If it's cold, they grow slow. A fly can complete a life cycle from an egg to adult in a couple of days in the summer. And that's why if you see them out there in the trash, that's because they have already completed the life cycle. And then the complete is going to have it will grow from an egg, and then it's going to have the different larva stages or the different instars, and then it's going to have a pupa or a chrysalis stage, and then it's going to have the adult. The complete life cycle is said to be a little bit more advanced. Why? Because in the case here, the juvenile of the insect with a complete life cycle may have a specific diet. And when it molts and becomes an adult, the adult can have a very different diet. The best example is going to be a butterfly. The larval stage for a butterfly, which is known as the caterpillar, the caterpillars are going to eat the leaves of the plant. And then when the butterfly becomes an adult with the proboscis, the adult butterfly is going to eat pollen and nectar. And so by having different diets between the adults and the juvenile, they're not competing with one another. And so that's why they're saying that it is more advanced. Whereas in the incomplete, they are going to have exactly the same diet. If there's not enough food, then the younglings are going to suffer, and then many of them are going to perish and they're going to die. Uh-huh. Incomplete here? Sorry, incomplete what?
No, I didn't. Go from a pest, a eating the plant to
Correct. So in the complete life cycle, which is also why in your sheet it asks for what life stage of the insect we're dealing with, because a caterpillar is going to be considered a pest during the larval stage when it's eating the cabbage or the white cabbage looper. So during the caterpillar stage, yes, it could be a pest. Or if you're going to deal with it, that you have to deal with it during the larval stage. It serves no purpose to be killing the butterflies that are flying around. They're done. And so, yes, an insect with a complete life cycle could be problematic in certain stages of its life and not in others, or sometimes it could be in both stages. So yeah, and that's why the stage when is this insect a problem is very important, so that you deal with it during the right time and not waste chemical resources by waging war on an insect that is no longer, that is more of a beneficial now than a pest.
because I knew that they were larvae. They were, at one point.
Yeah. Also be aware that most insects during the adult stage, their lifespan is not going to be several days. So they have only one purpose: mate, lay eggs, and then they die. And their youngness are going to continue. So yeah, killing butterflies, moths, yeah, it's best if you have those problems. There are organic methods, the BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, that you would spray onto your plant, and it's a bacteria spore. And so when the caterpillars chew the leaves, they're also going to ingest the spore, and it's going to kill them through an intestinal destruction. So yeah, no, don't kill the moth, don't kill the butterflies. And I mentioned some modifications. So with the beetles here, we have 4 wings. The first pair of wings, EL stands for elytra. So that is the modification. The first pair of wing is modified into a shell. And the insect is going to use that shell. So you can see them here in the red. That is the first pair of wings. It's going to use it for protection. When the insect is going to fly, it's then going to first lift the elytra, and then it's going to bring out its second pair of wings. Because they're only flying with 2 wings and they have a very hard shell kind of above them, the beetles are very clumsy flyers, and they're just going to be hitting you, landing into your hair, and that's a problem that People scream when the beetle lands in their head and it's, oh, they're attacking me. It's like, no, they're just clumsy flyers. It's not their fault. So just scrape it out and throw it away. It doesn't want to bother you. They're just dumb flyers. Imagine a tank with wings. That's exactly what you get here. It's very heavy and it's using a lot of energy and it's really clumsy and it doesn't maneuver well and it's just going to be flying. But they're there. So be aware of some of these modifications because in the case of beetles, if you see this hard shell with some of the antennae as well and a bunch of other things, but you know that that's a beetle and that is just a modifications. So it has 4 wings, 2 of them are modified and 2 of them are for flight. And then thrips, here's just another common pest, so you can start looking for them. When you look at them under a microscope, you're gonna see fringes or a comb. So you see hairs on the wings. So it has 4 wings and you see the hairs here and there's with the microscope how it looked. And there's the damage from the thrips. In this case, the damage is kind of yellowish white because that's where the insects are feeding and destroying the chlorophyll and destroying and damaging the plant. And so the damage is being shown as a lack of chlorophyll because it's been eaten and destroyed. And then arachnids, we like spiders. Spider Awareness Day should be every day because arachnids are good. Arachnids are everywhere. Spiders are everywhere. So the difference here, where we saw 3 different body parts with insects, head, thorax, and abdomen, the spiders have a fused head and thorax, and it is referred to as a cephalothorax, which means head thorax. So that's going to be the modification. So that's why there's only 2, and then it's going to have the abdomen. All spiders or arachnids have the ability to spin web, or they have spinnerets, which are the web making apparatus. All spiders have fangs because they're going to bite their prey. They're going to insert digestive enzymes, and as the insect gets digested, the spiders are then going to drink it. So they don't really chew, they don't have jaws. They're going to consume a liquid diet of digestive insect or digestive things inside them. And then spiders are going to have 8 legs as opposed to 6 for insects. So that's going to be the big difference. So are spiders good? Yes, they are. Sometimes, do all spiders bite? Yes. Do spiders go around the house? Yes. Do we have spiders looking at us right now? Yes. At any given minute of your life, you have about 8 spiders watching you.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
Watching out for me.
So somebody's watching you. So when you think that nobody's watching you, be aware. Spiders are watching you all the time. They always get blamed for a lot of things. So when people say, oh, I got bitten by the spider. Did you see the spider actually biting you? No. Okay, then why are you blaming innocent spiders that they bit you? So it's one of those things that when people have no idea what's wrong with them and the doctors cannot tell what's wrong with them, it's like, you got bitten by a spider. Okay, and they're happy. Like, no, spiders do not go around biting people. So they just get blamed for a lot of those things. Now, are there some spiders that can bite people? Yes. Most spiders are not going to have a jaw that is going to be strong enough to pierce through your skin. Very few of them do. I think the strongest one is the Sydney jumping spiders from Australia that is able to pierce through your fingernail.
Ooh.
And it's kind of, that's a dangerous one because during the mating season, it goes around and they're kind of defensive and aggressive, and I guess they will attack people. But that's in Australia, so don't worry about it, unless you go to Australia. But all other spiders, if they ever bite you, and they say that this daddy long legs, which everybody has the strongest venom or the strongest enzyme, but they just don't bite you because they're just very small fangs, and everybody's happy with them. Or the few like the brown recluse does have an enzyme that will digest you. So when you see some of the damage of the brown recluse, it's just the enzyme that digests that portion of your skin or your body. And it's mostly an accident, not that they're going to eat you because obviously you're way too big for them. But some of them do have some of the enzymes. And the black widow is going to be more of a paralysis of your lungs. So people die because they cannot breathe. So they get paralyzed. So if you get bitten by a black widow and you go to the hospital, they'll keep you alive for several days, making sure that you're able to breathe. And then once the toxin goes away, then you're fine. So the death of a black widow is not the actual bite, is the lack of lung function because of the toxin. So it's more like a neural damage, neural consequence. But spiders are good. Okay. So there's some of the nicer spiders. So the 8 legs, I know people hate them. I don't know why. But there's the beautiful, the fangs right here. Have you ever seen, it's cool. And there's the face and the eyes of the spiders. So those are the fangs right there. Question, Paulette? They all have different eyes depending on the spiders, not 8. Depending on the spiders, they have several different eyes. And then part of the spiders will be spider mites that are going to be problematic with houseplants and a bunch of other plants. But we also have ticks. We also have chiggers. We also have scabies mites if you have cats, dogs, pets. And we also have a bunch of other mites, including aloe mite outside, and you name it. Mites are everywhere. Dust mites. They eat your skin. You're dropping skins every day, so that's what they eat. Somebody has to eat that. So that's why you have dust mites in your house. Problem is the hairs and allergies to people. So, and if you see some of the things you find, you have mites living on you right now. They're so tiny that you don't really see them. Mites can come in and out of your mouth when you're sleeping, and they're just everywhere. So you don't hate mites, and you're in the wrong planet. So there's here's some really infected leaves. That's a morning glory, and there's where you have a lot of dots with all the mites and the webbing that they made, and that's a photograph with a microscope that we have in the classroom. So you can see the 8 legs and the hairs. And then diseases, we'll go into more detail with this later on. So some of the powdery mildew, the fungi, the rust, all gonna be problematic. No, we're not just taking mushrooms now. So if you find mushrooms, unless they're delicious, we don't want them. We want to concentrate on the plant pathogens or the diseases. And then biological controls, we're gonna see some. Yesterday, we found some praying mantis eggs, Paulette. So we're gonna grow them. So we're gonna put them in a container. We're gonna let them hatch, and what's gonna happen? You're gonna have about 100 baby praying mantis that will come from an egg case that you can buy in the store. And then as they get big, you're gonna end up with like 5 very fat praying mantis out of 100. So we'll let them we'll let them hatch, and then we'll put them into individual containers so that they don't eat each other. We'll give them some aphids so we can feed them, and then you can all take a pet praying mantis if you wish, or we'll release them into the garden. But we have 3 big egg cases. Question? If you can adopt a praying mantis, yes, you can adopt it. I got 3, and it wasn't Paulette who gave it to me. It was somebody else.
Go back over those trees.
They're still alive. Yes, they are. So when we're looking at biological control, natural enemies, so we'll see the mealybug destroyer, flies are going to be biological control, microscopic or very small wasp. So don't think of wasp as bad anymore. Even mites, they're going to be predatory mites that are going to be good biological control. Some other smaller beetles, and even assassin bugs that we're hoping to find. So this will also be a good biological control. So we'll start finding them, and it's going to be a point where hopefully we'll show you how they behave. And so here's just some suggestion. Just when you start to see a problem, what are some of the things that you need to consider? So first of all, is the population. It's 1 or 2 insects on a plant really a problematic, or is 100,000 insects on my plant really a problematic? So you can determine what is your tolerance level or your threshold. You determine that. Some people hate one insect. I hate bugs. I don't want a single caterpillar on my plant. Okay, well, let's just check it then. But at what point in time are you going to then determine that now I need to start taking some action, or I need to take some remediation so that I can prevent this from getting worse? So population numbers are going to be important. And that's how the insects are going to affect the plant. If you have 100,000 insects feeding on the stem, yes, they're going to cause a lot of problems. So you have one insect feeding on the stem? No, it's not going to have a problem. So the number is going to be very important. And then you take, again, educational prediction. What is your threshold? How much are you willing to tolerate? If you have 50% of the plant cover, okay, that's good. 25% per cover, okay, that's good. I can take action, or 10%, your choice. And then the amount of damage that is going to occur. So if it's affecting just one plant and that plant is relatively inexpensive, are you going to go and buy a product that is going to be extremely toxic, that is going to cost you $70 when you can replace that plant for $10, $15? So, or is it going to be affecting just my leaves? In the case of aloe mites, it's only affecting primarily the flowers. So can I sacrifice a few flowers before I declare war on a bunch of mites that are not really being problematic to my plant? It's more of an aesthetic problem. And you can make those determinations, so you can determine that. And that's it. So any other questions? I am recording right now. So yes, it's going to be recorded. So let me start recording now.